Rick, welcome in. I know this is probably a different way to spend this time of the year than you have done so for decades as a longtime NFL exec with the draft coming up next week. Tell us a little bit about what this time is like when you're in the front office getting ready for the first round of the draft.
Yeah, it's almost like Christmas or any kind of holiday. You're just counting down the days till it comes. You spent so many hours since way back in August with your scouts getting prepared for this. You've probably finished most of your meetings with your coaches, stacking your board. What we used to do after that was we called it cluster meetings or group meetings. So we would take 3 or 4 guys that we were very interested in, where we were going to select in the draft. We would group study them together, watch all their tape, and then we would say, if this scenario happens on draft day, how are we going to take these guys off the board? 1, 2, 3, 4. So a lot of teams are doing that right now. Pretty much the meetings are done. They're getting all the information from the combine. The psychological testing, the medical are all coming in now. They're finalizing the grades on these boards. The one thing that teams are doing right now is deciding whether a player is going to stay on their board or not. So if he has a medical concern, if he has a character concern, if it's something that doesn't fit your organization or the culture in your locker room, then they can turn their card over or just completely take him off the board.
And one thing, of course, nobody in the front office gets to do at this time of the year is sleep. Probably average a couple hours a night, a lot of coffee, getting ready to call those names in the first round of the draft. It is time for the big story. Yes, we focus on the NFL draft just a week and a day away. According to Rob Rang, the top 50 players include a handful of Big Ten guys, 8 that Rob predicts will go in the very first round, starting with C.J. Stroud, projected now as the number 2 overall pick. A lot of discussion about whether it will be Stroud or Alabama's Bryce Young going number 1 overall to the Carolina Panthers. So let's start there, Rick, because it seemed like maybe a month ago, Stroud was the lean for Carolina. Everybody kind of assumed the new head coach, Frank Reich, likes that prototype quarterback, 6'2 plus, big arm. Now it appears that Bryce Young maybe is in that conversation. When you look at Stroud, what's his appeal? Why would any team, whether he goes 1 or 2, like what he brings?
Well, it was funny. I had him on at the Combine on our studio set, and we interviewed him, and I asked him specifically, I said, I was at your first game when you opened up on a night game, first game of the season against Minnesota, and I watched your first half, and I was like, boy, Ohio State doesn't have a quarterback. Has that changed over the last couple of years? And he looked at me and says, well, you got to give me a chance to get warmed up. That was my first time ever out there in the spotlight. But he is big. He is athletic. He has a strong arm. The thing that really impressed everybody was his poise and patience in the pocket. And there's no question about his arm talent to make every throw at the NFL level. And people have knocked him a little bit. Well, you have NFL receivers you're throwing to, but you still have to execute through your progressions. You have to execute the throw. Maybe the most accurate passer I've seen out of the pocket in a long time, and that showed up at the Combine. Had one of the best throwing sessions at the Combine that I've seen in a long time. Did not disappoint at his pro day when I was able to go watch him at his pro day. The biggest concern is that you have this kid who is an extremely talented athlete as well, but you never see him use his legs to make plays. And in the NFL, a quarterback is going to have to make off-schedule throws. And he's going to get pressure. He's going to have to move around. You just can't sit in the pocket all the time. Then all of a sudden in the Michigan game, when I was watching that on tape, he started to move around and do some stuff. And then, the Georgia game, then you're seeing who C.J. Stroud was. So what they're saying in the draft rooms right now, if he did that in the Georgia game, can he do that when he comes up to this level? Or are we going to get back to see the pocket passer, a guy that's not going to utilize the athletic skills?
Yeah, I got to see him in person at both the Rose Bowl 2 years ago and that national semifinal against Georgia on the biggest stages. He played 2 of the greatest games that I have ever seen any quarterback play. One guy who may be moving up draft boards faster than any other player, certainly any other player in the Big Ten, is Lucas Van Ness. I know he never started at Iowa, but I believe he got more snaps defensively than any other D lineman. So is that really even a concern for NFL front offices?
No. All I want to do is see what he does when he's on tape, and he had plenty to show on tape. The thing that's very interesting about this player and why he's climbing up the draft boards is he had a phenomenal workout. I mean, he was 6'4", 6'5". He can weigh anything from 270 to 300 pounds. It depends on what these NFL teams want him to play. Do they want him to play defensive end? And I saw that in the Ohio State game, and he went against Paris Johnson Jr., who we'll talk about in a minute, and just bowled him back into the quarterback. Then you see him reduced inside to a 5 technique, a 3 technique. So teams are going to look at this player and say, what a phenomenal athlete we have. Where are we going to play him? And I kind of try to make some comparisons to these players. He reminded me of Daniil Hunter a little bit when we drafted him in Minnesota. He was a 3rd-round pick, but he was only an edge rusher, where Van Ness has that same type of skill set. He needs to improve on his technique, especially in the pass rush, but he has all the tools that the defensive line coach is going to want to work with.
Yeah, sometimes you see him, and some of his rush technique was more effective when he was actually lined up on the inside. That would be a huge benefit for whatever team ends up taking Lucas Van Ness. You brought up Paris Johnson. He is one of 2 Big Ten offensive linemen, along with Peter Skoronski of Northwestern, that are projected to go fairly high. What's your take on these 2 guys?
Yeah, well, let's start with Peter Skoronski. To me, he's the most complete offensive lineman in this draft class from a technical standpoint, from an athletic standpoint. The biggest concern is the arm length. Everybody's talking about the arm length. His arm length was under 33 inches, which is very short for an offensive tackle. If he projects, a lot of teams are going to project him inside a guard. I think if he moves inside a guard, he's going to be a Pro Bowler. I compare him to Brandon Scherf a little bit when he moved from tackle to guard. The other guy that did play left tackle and was very successful was a kid that came out a while back out of Purdue named Matt Light. Now, Matt Light had an inch longer arm than Peter does, but he ended up went 3 or 4 Pro Bowls up in New England, led them to the Super Bowl championship. So some teams will look at him as a tackle. Others are going to put him in guard right away, but I think this kid has Pro Bowl written all over him.
What about Paris Johnson? Obviously a very productive guy for Ohio State for multiple years.
Yeah, and he started at right guard a year ago. Then they moved him out to left tackle. Now, there's no question about his arm length. His arm length can go from this side of the studio over to this side of the studio. And very athletic. I think the biggest thing with him is when you watch him in the run game, he is physical. He tries to finish people off. He is an exceptional athlete in the open field. In pass protection, he has left tackle feet. I don't know if they're elite, but they're good enough. The biggest concern I have, and this is correctable with coaching, and that's what we're going to talk about in the draft meetings, when he sets in pass protection, he shoots his hands to the outside instead of using his length. And that's why a couple times, like I mentioned earlier, when Lucas Van Ness got into him, Lucas got right into his chest and was able to walk him back at the quarterback. But he does have the feet and everything you're looking for a starting left tackle. And I think he'll be a day 1 starter wherever team drafts him.
Well, offensive line certainly was a position of strength for the Big Ten, but I think you could make the argument, most certainly defensively, that the biggest position of strength for this league a year ago was DB. I mean, we expect a ton of guys to be gone early, multiple guys just from Illinois. Then you have Joey Porter from Penn State, a couple of guys from Maryland that could be late 1st or early 2nd round picks. But let's focus on Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. You talk about combine and pro day numbers. I mean, his numbers just blew people away. How much do numbers matter versus the game tape that executives are watching heading into the draft?
Well, his tape was the funnest and the most enjoyable I watched all season, because not only can he cover, he can play man, he can play zone, but he may be the most physical corner coming out in this year's draft. Even though he weighs 185 pounds, at his pro day he ran in the low 4.4s, what answered any question about speed concerns. But to me, he is the most complete corner coming out in this draft. It'll be interesting between him and Christian Gonzalez, the cornerback out of Oregon, which one goes first off the board, but he's right up there.
Yeah, that Illinois defensive backfield, and we'll touch on Illinois' spring game coming up in just a bit, because they lose Witherspoon, they lose Quan Martin, they lose Sidney Brown, Ryan Walters goes to Purdue. Rick can offer some thoughts on Illinois, trying to make up for all those losses. But first, let's go back to the offensive line and center. Last couple of years, P.J. Fleck and Minnesota have just churned out veterans, productive guys on that offensive line. And center is such an important position at the NFL. What's the take on John Michael Schmitz?
Yeah, he had a phenomenal Senior Bowl. Some people will question his athletic skill set, but you look at his size. You look at he's been a 3-year starter, a 4-year starter ever since he's walked on campus. You look at his wrestling background, and all that translates to the field. He's big, he's powerful. He can fit in any scheme. Some of the questions and concerns were in his pass pro, but he answered those questions down at the Senior Bowl. I think this guy is also going to get drafted higher than people think, maybe low 1, early 2, but he'll walk in and be a day 1 starter, not only because of his physical traits, but because he's so intelligent.
All right, so we saw a group listed among Rob Rang's top 50, but I know there's at least one player that you think from the Big Ten probably should have been included on that list, and he wasn't. Who's that guy?
Sam Laporta. That's one of my favorite players, a tight end out of Iowa. He ran in the 4.5s, which I don't know if people expected. He needs to get a little stronger as a run blocker, but he gives excellent effort and energy to try to finish. He can make plays in the passing game. Their quarterback play wasn't as probably good, and he would have had more production if he had a better quarterback play. But this guy is a complete tight end. A lot of people I talk to compare him to maybe a poor man's George Kittle. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, but I think he belongs in the top 50.
I saw George Kittle's most recent contract. I don't think poor and George Kittle belong anywhere near the same sentence anymore, and that would certainly be a very nice comparison for whatever team decides to take a flyer on Sam Laporta in the first round or after. Take a quick Saturday, a full day of spring football begins noon Eastern. Live coverage of the Minnesota spring game. Then Matt Rhule leads the Huskers onto the field in Lincoln for Nebraska's red-white spring game, followed by Luke Fickell's Badgers in action in Madison. It is all Saturday, only on Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Our focus right now is Lincoln, which is where we find today's subject for the big interview, Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule. Matt, I know it's a busy week, so first and foremost, we appreciate you taking a few moments to join us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
All right, Matt, I know that some 60,000 tickets already sold for this weekend's spring game. What should the Husker faithful expect?
You know, we're going to play a real game. We're gonna go out there. Quarterbacks will be live. We'll kick. We'll punt. We'll kick field goals. I think we're at a point right now as a team where we have to see. We don't need to hold anything back. We need to see where we are. We need to compete against each other, and so it should make for a really good game for people to watch.
I'm interested to get into some individual players in a second, but I was struck by a concept that I learned that you utilize about the reduction of the thought of good and bad to help alleviate pressure off of those players. So what does that mean, like on a daily basis, whether it's in practice, in the locker room, watching film?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, you know, we're on a journey towards greatness, and so we're on a journey towards a season, and we have a tendency to just label things, right? We label today. I played good today. I played bad today. That was a good play. That was a bad play. And I just trying to get the guys to understand it is what it is, man. Like you have to just be in the moment. And some things, you know, maybe they went well, maybe they didn't go well, but it's just about constantly just getting a little bit better. So we believe in that deep practice. You know, I could show the guys Kobe Bryant talking about, you know, missing the game-winning shot as a rookie and how it propelled him to greatness. And so what we think sometimes is bad actually is the best thing that happened to us. So just trying to get our guys to move out of that realm. Football's not a game of perfect. Sometimes you go 3 and out. So just getting out of that idea of being perfect and instead just really, you know, leaning into just constant improvement.
Matt, sounds like you're really putting to use that degree, that master's in educational psychology you got at Buffalo.
I did. I earned it the hard way, so I have to use it.
I'm also interested to find out about the single-digit jersey concept. Obviously, at Nebraska, there's a lot of talk about the black shirts and that outstanding defense. But I love this idea of single-digit jerseys going to the toughest guys on your team. So where do you stand in terms of the distribution of those jerseys?
You know, we'll do that in the fall. You know, we did it at Temple. We did it at Baylor. We just feel like, you know, we want to be one of those programs where, you know, everything is earned. You know, for lack of a better term, you eat what you kill, you know, and so we want to recognize those guys. And, you know, it's not just about being physically tough. It's who's mentally tough, who's competitively tough. The team votes for it. The coaches have no part in it. They do that in preseason. Sometimes it makes our equipment manager a little bit nervous as he's trying to get ready for the season. But I think it's a great way to teach guys that no matter, it's not about your talent level. It's just about who you are and what you do.
One of the great quotes of all time I heard earlier this spring from OC Marcus Satterfield. He said, I don't want to get this wrong. I'd put my dog at quarterback if he takes care of the ball and helps us win games. Now, I'm assuming the pup has no eligibility left. So with that out of the question, what have you seen? I know Casey Thompson, Logan Smothers have both been in various times limited a little bit during the spring.
Yeah, you know, they basically, Casey and Logan have basically been out, and we've seen them play in games, so we have a great feel for what they can do. But Jeff Sims, Richard Torres, Chuba Purdy, Heinrich Harburg, you know, we have 4 scholarship quarterbacks out there, and we've put them through the paces. You know, we're live in practice in scrimmages. They get tackled, they get hit, and not for to be a Neanderthal, but we want to see what they can really do. We want to see them play, and I think they've done a really nice job. To Marcus's point, we want to protect the football, but we also want to be explosive. And I think that's the fine line. We want to create explosive plays while still taking care of the football. And I think for the most part, those guys have done a really nice job. And Jeff, Chuba, and Heinrich also have the added dimension of being able to run. They're explosive athletes. And so, we want to utilize that in everything that we do.
From the quarterback spot or the running back spot, obviously, you have to be able to run to stay balanced, which every team wants to do. But there have been so many injuries before you got there at that running back spot. There's been inconsistency there as well. How has that shaped up in the spring, as well as the way that they're running behind the offensive line?
Our strength right now is running the football. I think we have as deep a running back room as I've ever been a part of. I don't know about other people, but Anthony Grant, I think he had close to 1,000 yards last year. A.J. Allen, a tremendously dynamic young player. Gabe Irvin, big, powerful back, who's really kind of been the starter along with Ramir Johnson for all of spring. And Ramir's dynamic, explosive, quick, fast. We have a young player, a redshirt freshman, in Emmett Johnson, who's really coming on right now. So we have a really a deep room. We have Trevor Lubins, a walk-on player who has done an excellent job for us. I think we have 5 backs that could go in the game and we feel like we could win with. And so part of what we need to do is find a way to get 2 guys on the field, 3 guys on the field. And that's really where Marcus Satterfield, our OC, and EJ Barthela, running back coach, have really worked at trying to find a way to get those guys involved and utilize them.
Transfer is a big part of what every program does these days. Hearing a lot about these 3 guys on the offensive end: Billy Kemp, Eric Gilbert, Ben Scott. What should we know about that trio?
Well, they've done a really nice job. They're all talented players. They're all guys who are going to have a chance to, play at the next level. And so to get them in here, they're winners and they're very focused right now. They want to help us win. They want to have a great experience, but they also want to play their best football so that they can, augment their possibilities at the next level and get drafted even higher. So I see a very focused group. Those guys are working really hard, and I think it's going to really benefit us come this fall, and hopefully we can help benefit them as well.
Matt, when I look at the defensive side, there is so much depth in that secondary. And I know that DC Tony White's scheme a lot of times utilizes that 3-3-5. So how does that play in to a team that seems to have a lot of different pieces that you can put both at that defensive back position and at that quote-unquote kind of rover hybrid spot?
Yeah, really with that rover hybrid spot, whether it's, Miles Farmer or Isaac Gifford, Isaac played the nickel Sam last year. So we just kind of moved his alignment, but it's really the same personnel in a lot of different ways. We want to have a lot of speed on the field. When you first look at the Big Ten, there's kind of this idea out there that people are lining up in, two backs and tight ends and 21 personnel. But when you do the math and you really study it, there's a lot of 3 receiver sets in the league. And so having the ability to get speed on the field, Quentin Newsom's a veteran player for us, an outstanding corner. Malcolm Hartzog, we have a lot of really good. Omar Brown, we have a lot of guys back from the back end that we think can make a difference, and that's probably one of the strengths of our team. And so we have guys who can run, who can fly around. We just need to continue to improve our ability to take the ball away, and those guys making plays on the ball will really affect how our season goes.
Matt, who's kind of jumped out on that side as maybe the leader of this team after the departure of Garrett Nelson, who really was kind of emotionally the heart and soul of the defense last year?
I think we have kind of a diffused leadership. We have a lot of different guys over there. I think Nash Hutchmacher is probably one of the most improved players on this team. Nose tackle, veteran player, but still has a lot of development that he's making right now. So I'm excited to see what he can do out there. Jamari Butler's a young player that's been waiting his turn to get out there and play with, Garrett and Caleb Tanner in front of him. And he's a guy that I think has done a tremendous job. So I think that group, and I think all great defenses, they kind of play for each other. And the leadership kind of comes from a little bit from all of them. And so we're trying to get them to buy into this concept of, hey, we have a brand on defense. We have a standard that we want to play on defense, and each one of them holding themselves accountable. But when you have guys like Nash and Jamari making the steps that they're making, it brings everyone else along.
Matt, I know you kind of leave the public eye a little bit, maybe not in Lincoln, but at least nationally after the spring game is played. What is life like for you and the staff in between Saturday and when fall camp opens back up?
It's a lot of recruiting and camps, and especially in May, we'll take the week after the spring game and sit down with every player and give them all an evaluation, get an evaluation from them of how they feel like we're doing. Try to come up with a plan for each player in terms of, hey, this is how we think you can best impact the team, and then start getting ready for the season. Start getting ready for Minnesota and Colorado and all the wonderful teams that we have a chance to play, and making sure that we really pour into our players over the summer. When you're a first-year head coach, the summer is so vital. The guys, that's where they really start to build that brotherhood as they're out there in the summer workouts. So, we have a lot of work to do, and I'm excited to get started, though.
Well, let's finish with the start of that schedule, Matt. I'm glad you brought up those two games because it is a little bit unique that you play 2 in a row on the road, including a conference opener. And then I'm not sure if you've heard, there's also a first-year head coach at Colorado that's kind of getting a little bit of buzz in that Week 2 game as well. What are your thoughts on that first 2-week start for you guys?
Well, it's a heck of a way to start off. We're not starting off with some warm-up game. I mean, starting off with Minnesota in the last 10 years. University of Nebraska, we're 3-7 against Minnesota, and I have so much respect for PJ Fleck. When he was at Western Michigan, I was at Temple. Build a friendship there. I think he does an excellent job, and I don't know if anybody does a better job of building a culture and a brand within their organization that the guys can gravitate towards. And so it'll be a real challenge. It'll be a great opportunity for us to go on the road and play an excellent team like that. And then I think Coach Sanders is everything that's right with college football. I mean, he's bringing attention to Colorado, bringing attention to those players. We'll have to go up and play in the altitude. I think it'll be a great game. When you think about Colorado, Nebraska, like those are the games I grew up on, and so what an unbelievable opportunity to be a part of that tremendous rivalry from years past.
Certainly can't wait to see it all get started. Nebraska head coach Matt Rhule. Matt, we really appreciate the time. Enjoy this weekend spring game in Lincoln, and of course, hope everybody stays healthy. And we can't wait to see that opener against Minnesota in coming this fall.
Yes, sir. Go Big Red.
There are always a handful of guys in the draft who don't go on day one. Sometimes they don't even go in day 2. And then 10, 12 years later, they're still making a check in the NFL, being productive players for their pro teams. According to Rick Spielman, here are some of the guys that could be considered Big Ten sleepers in the 2023 draft on the offensive side. Rick Pizzo back with the aforementioned Rick Spielman. Let's start with the tight ends because there were a couple of them on that list. And Brenton Strange is a guy whose name we're hearing more and more often, put up some pretty good numbers. He's a guy that I think would fit in a lot of different systems.
Yeah, you didn't hear a lot about him in the fall because he didn't have this outrageous production from catching the ball. But when you watch him on tape, he went and ran well at the combine. He's extremely athletic. He plays a lot of H-back, so they'll use him in a lot of movement. He's extremely competitive as a blocker. The thing that really impressed me was his athletic skill set. When he runs routes, he's able to break out of cuts. He can separate in man coverage, and he can accelerate upfield after the catch. So you have a guy that a lot of teams are going to look at as a potential H-back. I don't think he's going to be an on-the-line wide type tight end like the old school wides that used to come out. But some teams will even look at him as a fullback as well.
What about Luke Schoonmaker? Obviously, Michigan.
Now, there's an old school.
Michigan has loved to use the tight end. That's what Jim Harbaugh does. But it also translates pretty well to the NFL.
Yeah, now this is an old school tight end that's going to line up on the line of scrimmage. He ran 4.63, which I think surprised a lot of people because he's almost 6'6", 251 pounds. He jumped out of the gym, had all these great test numbers. When you watch him on tape, he's probably the best blocking tight end in the Big Ten this year. And don't discredit what he can do as a receiver. He can get into and out of his cuts. He's got a large catching radius. Big target for any quarterback in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to be one of those tight ends that stretch the field, but he's going to fit in right away as a blocking tight end and help at the short and intermediate level in the passing game.
Let's talk about some of those guys who can take the top off, kind of burners at that wide receiver position, because there were 3 on your list. Jaden Reed, a guy from Michigan State, who was really the only game breaker that this team had at a lot of portions the last couple of years.
Yeah, no, he is an explosive slot receiver. The other thing that's going to give him a lot of value to a team is that he's also a punt and kickoff returner. He makes some highlight type catches down the field, extremely athletic to adjust to the ball. He's also quick after the catch, so I see him coming in and making an impact as a slot receiver and as a punt and kickoff returner.
Parker Washington, a guy who got a little bit better every year at Penn State and then established himself as a number 1 guy heading into this draft.
Yeah, and he was a very productive versus Ohio State if you watch that game. He is a thickly lower body build type. He almost looks like a running back. So some teams are going to look at him as a slot. He hasn't been able to work out because he's been injured. He didn't work out at the combine or his pro day. But don't be surprised if some teams line him up as a third down back, catching the ball out of the backfield.
Nebraska's Trey Palmer, the last time I got to see him in person, he was lighting up the Iowa DBs in that win over the Hawkeyes that kept them out of the Big Ten championship game last year. And then he ran a crazy 40 number. That has to appeal to some teams.
Yeah, when you watch a tape, you can see this guy fly by corners, and there's some really good corners at the Big Ten level. But this guy is speed, speed, speed. And he had a big game against Purdue. He can extend the field. He ran 4.33 at the combine. He's long. He's athletic. Needs to get a little stronger at the catching point when he's in contested situations. Needs a little bit route refinement. But when I watched him on tape, popped into my head Mike Wallace, who was a great Pittsburgh Steeler that can really extend and stretch the field.
And again, one of those guys who had a lengthy career with multiple teams because you fit into a lot of different systems. Let's go to the other side of the ball and potential sleepers on defense coming out of the Big Ten. Nick Herbig was so productive during his career at Wisconsin. And then you see a ton of DBs. Let's start with the linebacker and Herbig, who basically ran everything that Wisconsin did defensively last year.
Yeah, no, he's a phenomenal football player. He's a little undersized to say he's going to fit as a defensive end, but he's going to make his money as an edge rusher. But a lot of teams are going to, because he's 6'2", he's about 250 pounds. He ran 4.6s at the combine, which is very good. But they're going to stack him behind the line of scrimmage. And you see sometimes during the tape when he drops, he does have some instincts and awareness and coverage, but he is one of the best pass rushers, I thought, last year in the Big Ten. And I think they'll stack him and they'll blitz him through the A-gap, try to create some mismatches versus running backs when the running back has to come up and take him in pass pro. But very good football player and fun to watch on tape.
I'm glad you brought up the word instinct, because Jim Leonard told us in multiple meetings last year that he was one of the smartest players, that he always had the right instinct to make the right decision at those critical times for that Badger defense. I mentioned earlier in the show how strong the Big Ten was at DB. We talked a little bit about Devin Witherspoon, but his former Illinois teammate Quan Martin is another guy that's getting some attention.
Yeah, Quan Martin is a very interesting player. And when you watch the tape on him this year, he lined up over at Nick. He moves like a corner. They played him outside some. Then you saw a couple of times where they lined him up at free safety. I think it's such a weak safety class in this year's draft. When you get an athlete like this that can do multiple positions and move him around, I think teams will look at him as a free safety and line him up there, and I think he's going to have a very productive NFL career.
So there are other guys on this list: Riley Moss from Iowa, Jordan Howden, Jacorian Bennett. In general, when you're looking for DBs, and I know it depends on whether you're looking for a lockdown cover guy or you're looking for a game-changing kind of safety, what are you really looking for? What makes the best guys at that position stand out?
Well, come to watch the Big Ten, because they had a ton of DBs this year. But I think it's the scheme fit. There are some big corners. There are a lot of big corners over 6 foot now. Teams are talking about, can they match up with the big receivers, because there's so many athletic receivers in the NFL. And then you look at the smaller guys. Those guys are going to be probably considered as nickelbacks to cover the slots. But the bigger and the faster you are, that's what the corner position is turning into in the NFL.
Well, it has to when you have wide receivers like DK Metcalf. I remember head coaches saying Metcalf would walk into their room and they'd think, oh, is he a linebacker? Is he a defensive end? And he'd tell them, no, I'm a wide receiver. So, yes, you have to have a DB that can run and keep up with that guy.
T. Higgins, Jamar, just look at all the receivers and the top receivers and how big and productive they are.
And that's why the cornerbacks have to be as good as they are. It is time for today's big stat, brought to you by Old National Bank. What a run for Maryland men's lacrosse, winning 6 of the first 7 Big Ten regular season titles. Terps are 7-1 against ranked opposition this season and will win at least a share of the Big Ten title and the number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament with a victory over Johns Hopkins this weekend in a game you can see on Big Ten Network. Ahead of that game, welcome in head coach John Tillman. John, we'll get to your team in just a second, but I want to start with the fact that we have Rick Spielman in studio today offering some analysis on the NFL draft, and it's my understanding that you actually recruited his son JD before JD decided to play football in college. What do you recall about that process?
Just really great process. Really enjoyed meeting JD and impressive young man on and off the field, but also the family, just really good people. So the type of people you would want as part of your program, because that's what really makes it go. I'm happy for him and his success, and certainly fond memories, and wish them very well.
John, I'm curious, when you look at college lacrosse as a whole this year in comparison to the last few years, the last couple of years, there have been some really dominant teams. Your teams have certainly qualified in that category as well. This year, there appears to be a little bit more parity in the world of college lacrosse. Would you agree with that statement? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think you have a few teams, certainly you look at Notre Dame, Duke, and Virginia that have had, pretty darn consistent seasons. But overall, outside of those three, I do think there is a lot of parity, a lot of people beating each other. And I just think there's so many good coaches out there that they do a great job of recruiting, utilizing the portal, developing talent, game planning, and then the growth of the game. There's just so many really good players all over, the country, but also obviously a lot of kids coming down from Canada. So it makes for, I think, for the growth of the game and for new programs, it's a really exciting time.
I'm glad you brought up the portal, because anytime transfer portal is discussed, the main focus is football and basketball, but it is having an effect on every sport inside every major program. How has it affected your program and men's college lacrosse as a whole?
I think some programs have utilized it very successfully, and some programs have made that very, clear. Hey, this is going to be part of what we do. And I think there's a lot of ways to build a team, and I don't think there's one way to do it. I think each coach and each staff, has a sense of what would work best for them. But I do think you have to be careful, especially when you're bringing in players, if they're only coming in for 1 year, you certainly want to be mindful of, maintaining your culture and finding the right guys, which you still can do from the portal. Some of these guys that have an extra year, they might be guys you recruited the first time, and the circumstances just didn't work out. So I do think it's much like you're going to recruit kids in high school, but you got to find the right guys for you. I think some programs have done it incredibly well. Sometimes maybe it doesn't quite work out, but it's something that, even though there's one more year of everybody getting the extra year, I think there's always going to be, kids that get hurt or, have a redshirt year available, and it'll be around for a while, maybe just to a lesser extent.
John, when you look at your team specifically, last few years, you've had guys putting up just silly point numbers. This team doesn't necessarily have that guy, but you have 5 players that I believe right now have accounted for between 24 and 27 points. So really well-rounded. What's the strength of this team? What does that stat kind of tell us about the makeup of this particular group?
Yeah, with, the last 2 years we had a lot of the similar guys, coming back in 21 and 22. So there was a lot of familiarity, and we knew, with the graduation of the guys last year, there were just going to be a lot of new parts. And then you add into that, we had 3 ACL injuries to guys that were probably our most experienced at those positions: attack, defensive midfield, and goal. There's just a lot of new guys. So super proud of this group. So many guys in new spots, whether they're freshmen or guys that, have been working really hard for their opportunity. So we've done it differently. We don't have a Logan Wisnauskas or Jared Bernhardt that are Tewaaraton type candidates, but we have really good players, very unselfish players, very team first guys that are super coachable. And to me, it's been a lot of fun. I mentioned to the guys yesterday how proud I was of them, just because we've dealt with a lot of adversity. It hasn't been easy. We've had some tough moments. We had some injuries. We've had games that just didn't necessarily go our way, but they've bounced back. And I'm just proud of, how they've responded to adversity, how selfless they've been, and for the leaders for really stepping up and helping this team move along. It hasn't always been a work of art or pretty, but it's just fun to see.
John, I know that one game does not define a season, but I want to go back to that April 7th game against Ohio State. You're coming off a loss. You're trailing for the majority of that game. You scored the last 4 goals, including the overtime winner, to avoid that 2-game streak. How much did that kind of change, whether it was the confidence or the flow of where this team was headed?
Yeah, at halftime of that game, we really talked about walking off the field. We just want to make sure that when people walk off the field, they saw, who we were, whether it was how hard we played, how unselfish, the resiliency, the physicality. And we weren't necessarily concerned, we dug ourselves a 4-goal deficit at halftime. So it was going to be one at a time. But I think it was critical that we come back and just show everybody how we play. And I thought little by little, we kept coming back and coming back. And I was super proud of the guys and how they did bounce back and stuck together. But then after that, it was, hey, we have another tough road game against a really good opponent. We can't just play 30 minutes of lacrosse. We've got to keep improving. At this time of year, you're going to pay a price in our league if you don't try to put together 60 minutes. And I felt like we got closer on Sunday night against a really good Rutgers team, a team we have a lot of respect for, well-coached team. But now, obviously, we're staring down a team that's been really good all year, and a team that's probably as complete a team as we've seen.
And we know that team, being Johns Hopkins, will battle you for at least a share, and it could be the outright Big Ten regular season title, depending on what Penn State does in their game. This has long been considered one of the great rivalries in the history of men's college lacrosse at any level, but now as conference opponents and arguably playing for the Big Ten regular season title, how much does that add to this weekend's matchup with the Blue Jays?
Yeah, having been here 13 years now, I obviously got a very, having been down in this area and coaching at the Naval Academy, you obviously get a sense of how important lacrosse is here. And so, seeing this rivalry, and maybe I scouted it, when I was younger and coaching elsewhere. So attending the games was always really impressive. But to be part of it, it is special. I think back to 2017, I think there were 14,000 people here. Typically, it's the most highly attended game of the year when it's played here at Maryland. So I think we're going to have another really good crowd. It's just special. The history, the tradition, the importance of lacrosse at both schools. Certainly so much respect for Hopkins, the players that have come through, obviously the coaches. Last year we had Bobby Benson on our staff, who was a Hopkins alum. Obviously, he spoke to the tradition and what it's meant there. And we have another assistant coach this year, Tim Obransky, who's coached there. So again, something that I think it's special to be part of these games. You don't take it for granted, with the added significance of, the winner, what that means. It just only adds to it. So we have a lot of prep to do. They're really, really good. But I know we're glad this game's at home. We're excited to be back. It's been a few weeks, and we're hoping that crowd can really help us on Saturday.
We don't need to keep you from that prep any longer. Really looking forward to that game. John Tillman, head coach of Maryland men's lacrosse, leading into this weekend's regular season finale. John, we appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.